And I am joined today by Goldie Blumenstyk. She is a senior writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education. Just 2 years ago, she won a first place award for reporting about the business of higher education from the Education Writers Association. And she's currently at work on a book, something you might be interested in, called What Everyone Needs to Know About Higher Education in Crisis. So we're looking forward to seeing that in 2014.
Let's hope, yep.
Okay, terrific. For those who don't know about the National Press Foundation, we are a nonprofit. We're based here in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to help journalists understand complex topics, like the one we're talking about today. All of our programs are on the record. We always encourage questions. Today, you can type your questions into the chat box, which you should see on the right side of your screen. If you don't see it there, look for a button that says full screen, and that is a toggle. So if you click that, the video will either shrink or expand. We're going to take your questions in the order that we get them. And by tomorrow, we hope to have a recorded version of this webinar on our website at nationalpress.org. So if you registered in advance, we'll send you an email with a link to that recorded version. And if you want to share it with a friend or just revisit it, it'll be available for you. One more commercial before you begin. If you find this webinar helpful, we'd like to have you support quality journalism. And you can do that by looking for a button on the homepage of our website that says Donate Here. We encourage you to use that button early and often. If you're tweeting today, we are at NatPress, and Goldie is
At Goldie Standard.
At Goldie Standard. So please feel free to tweet away as you watch today. So welcome.
Thank you.
I think in a minute we're going to have an opportunity to share our screen, which we will do, and then all of you will be able to see the slides that Goldie's prepared, and she will go through the slides. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, just chat them in. I'll be monitoring the chat, and we can take questions as we go. We'll also have time at the end for those questions. Now, so far, we are not seeing an opportunity to share the screen. So there we go. That and this and that. There we go. Now, I'll just wait 1 minute to make sure that everybody else sees what we see. And I'm getting a nod. So Goldie, take it away.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Linda, thanks for inviting me to be part of this webinar. What I've done is put together a lot of data from a lot of places, and I'm going to run through it probably kind of quickly. Not because I'm expecting everyone to sort of see these charts as they fly by and understand them all, but to sort of walk you through the kinds of data that's out there about college costs, student debt, affordability, and the like. And then presumably you can go back there and look through them and through the other reports from which they are drawn and do some more of your own reporting later on. But I thought this would be a great way to familiarize people with the sort of the body of work that's out there on college costs, affordability, debt, etc. Few things about the data here. It's difficult to work with sometimes because there's three main sources for data on college costs. Well, there's probably more than three, but three I've drawn upon primarily are the College Board, the National Center on Educational Statistics, the Delta Project, there's a few others as well. Just about everybody calculates their numbers a little bit differently, unfortunately. One person calculates net price in one way, another group calculates it in another way. So that's just one of the caveats that you have to think about when you're doing this kind of reporting and drawing reports from one place from another. The other thing to think about, it's very important, and this happens a lot in the press. It's a problem. We do it too sometimes at the Chronicle. You can't really generalize about college costs. The things that happen, the things that affect spending and tuition at a private research university are very different than what affects spending at a two-year public community college. So when you're doing this cost reporting, you have to think about the different kinds of institutions that you're writing about. Public and private, same issue. Another thing is averages can really, be deceiving sometimes because they're averages. They're not the experience of a particular family, and they really only represent the average. That said, a lot of what I'm going to be doing today is going to be about averages because it's hard to do it otherwise. But as you're doing your reporting, there's often data available that's based on family income. The NCS site, the Education Department site, has data by family income. And if you wanted to do some sort of more in-depth reporting, you can pull up a lot of the statistics that they have that divides it up by families, by price, by income. So that affordability is an issue here. So looking at things by income levels matter. And I'm going to talk a lot today about net price versus sticker price, and that really does matter when we're talking about college costs. So I want you to just think about that a little bit along the way and appreciate that when people talk about the rising cost of college, there is so much financial aid in the system that it really is a factor that you can't really ignore. Hey, let's start going on. This slide is pretty much the whole story about higher education in the last, sort of 20 years. Unfortunately, it only goes out to 2009. But so much of the angst about college costs today reflects the fact that tuition and fees are going up, and family incomes are staying pretty much flat. And I'll just point out on this chart, this is household wage income, and I think it's an average. I think if we had the median, that 0.7 number would even be more depressing because that would even be flatter. This at least reflects some of the, the income gains of the 1% in that average number. And this is part of the problem right here. Prices have gone up, but family incomes have gone down, and so affordability is what makes people uncomfortable and unhappy, and it creates a real affordability problem here. The other thing to think about as we're staring at this chart is the diversity in the system really does make a difference as well. College officials talk about that a lot, and it often sounds like maybe an excuse. Oh, we have a diversity of our system. You can't really generalize. Well, in a way, they're right. At a public research university, tuition maybe would cover 23% of the revenues for the institution. At a private master's university, it might be 75%. So these are very different kinds of institutions, and they all get their money and spend their money in different ways. So what you should think about right now is also the costs vary along a very big spectrum, and it's also important to remember that half of all students now attend a college where the public tuition and the fees are below $11,093. That's from the latest College Board numbers that just came out. And then this slide, you can see half of all the public college students go to a school where it's tuition and fees published, that's the sticker, are below 9. Half of all the students at private colleges go to a school where the published number is about 31,290. Well, exactly 31,290 actually. And of course, room and board adds a little bit to those costs as well. So that's just to get some broad perspective on where we are right now in terms of costs. And if you want to sort of get a sense of how that breaks down, this little chart here, the one on the left shows all students, then public, and then private. And it sort of shows how students are dispersed between public and where the students go and what they're paying for tuition. This is all from the College Board, so appreciate that. I've talked about net price. Only 1/3 of full-time students actually pay the sticker price. Everybody else is paying some variation on that. And some of that's is aid coming from the colleges, some of that's in the form of Pell Grants from the government or other kinds of state aid, but only 1/3 pay the actual sticker price. And also at public colleges over the past decade, the net price rose faster than the sticker price. So while there is a sticker price and a net price, on paper and in real terms, students are paying more. That's just a fact. So at a public four-year college, just read the slide for you here, or you can all read yourselves, I guess, but sticker price is now 8,893. It's up 2.9% from the year earlier. That's without inflation, because 1 year they don't really calculate inflation. It's up 50% over the past decade after inflation. And you could say, well, why are we counting inflation? Because even though inflation has been low, so it's not like it's been a huge factor, but you really do, over a 10-year span, you really do have to think about inflation when you start to look at these costs. Now, that's the sticker price. The net price has gone up even more, 62.5% after inflation.
Well, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
A 2.9% increase compared with a 62% increase. That's really...
Well, yeah, the 2.9 is the 1 year. So,
right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
and the 60 and the, but it's definitely been we're going to get into that a little bit more later. A lot of that at the public colleges has been a lot about where the states have been spending their money, or more appropriately, where the states have not been spending their money.
Can we just go back for a minute, because I misread it and I want to verify for everybody. So 50% compared with 62.5%, is that right?
The
so
difference
those are the right numbers.
Between the net and the sticker.
Right. Still a big difference. Okay.
All right.
Other way.
Oh, I'm going the wrong way.
Yeah, there we go.
Technical. I have to do technical things. I get nit.
You're right where you need to be.
So, and just so you know, the average community college price is about $3,200 right now. And when you factor in this grant aid at a community college, the net price is actually gone down. I didn't put that number up here, but this slide shows the sort of the sticker price versus the net price at private colleges. And here you go at private colleges, the sticker price is now $30,000, and it's gone up about 25%. The four-year private net price has actually, adjusted for inflation, has actually declined by about 8%. That's taking into account all the financial aid that is available, and again, the average. This is the average. So, what is it? Your situation may differ. Your circumstances may differ. But on the overall average, this takes into account a lot of students getting Pell Grants right now. Just so you know, the average net price is 41% of the average sticker price. It's a big gap between net and sticker. So these next two slides are going to just sort of show you the effects of net price and sticker price at institutions. Starting here, these are the publics, and these are the privates. See, we're not going to review these heavily right now, but we can go back over that later on and sort of take a look at how things change, how the sticker price versus the net price makes a difference for students.
It's interesting on that last slide too. You also have the difference between your undergraduate and then graduate degree programs, and the master's and doctoral programs.
Well, these are undergraduate tuitions, but these are the kinds of institutions that they are. Sorry, I should have made that clear. A private bachelor's degree is a kind of a four-year college, like where I went to school, Colgate. A private master's would be a place that doesn't really offer doctoral degrees, but you can go get a lot of your master's in teaching or your master's in other things.
Okay, but the numbers there are actually for undergraduate students.
Yeah.
At those schools. That's good to clarify. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good to know. So when you're investigating schools, or if you're reporting on schools, you need to know sort of what basket a particular school falls into.
Right. Generally, the higher the level of degrees that they're offering, they're going to tend to probably be more expensive school. Their costs for education are going to be more expensive, but their cost to you will be different. A private master's degree will be a pretty expensive school because they don't have a lot of other resources. They depend a lot on tuition. So for their revenues, and so students will be paying more at a private master's because they don't have, they tend not to have that many huge endowments. They tend not to have a lot of research money coming in. They don't have these other sources of income that will offset the costs of the price.
Interesting.
All right, now I may have gotten myself lost here. I wanted to say one more thing about public college trends over the. All right, that was that slide. I wanted to say one more thing about public college trends, particularly over the last 5 years during the Great Recession. A lot of you know their own states. Over the past 5 years, in-state tuition and fees after inflation have been going up a lot. They've gone up 27% at a four-year public colleges, 29% at community colleges. Let's say that again, 29% at community colleges. As state funding has declined, at public colleges, tuition sticker prices have gone up to make up for the difference. And also there's some charts in the college board reports that just came out. 11 flagship state universities have raised their out-of-state tuition prices by more than 40% after inflation in the last 5 years. This going for out-of-state students has been a very big strategy for universities to make up the difference. And the big public flagships are the ones that have the best ability to do that. They can draw the students. It's a lot easier for them to attract an out-of-state student than it would be for sort of a regional university in Illinois or something like that. University of Michigan can attract these students pretty easily. Another thing to keep in mind, just a factoid or sort of a thought bubble in there, keep in your head, is about the tuition discounting, which is a factor that affects the private colleges quite a lot. Talked about the difference between the net and the sticker. The discount basically measures the proportion of how much gross tuition that's coming in that the college then returns back to the students in the form of grants or some other kind of aid. Tuition discounting is a recruiting technique that a lot of private colleges use to attract students. You hear, my kid got a scholarship to so-and-so. Well, the school knows at the end of the day, they'd rather have your student come, and maybe they won't get that $30,000 tuition money that they're charging you, but they can get $28,000 or $26,000 out of your student, and they're still going to be happy because that's still going to be revenue that will come in and will help them keep their costs going. The trouble with this discounting thing is, as you can imagine, at some point you start to cycle yourself into a problem, and you start to discount so much that you cannot really make your budget seem sustainable. And if you're a tuition-dependent university and you don't have these other sources, you don't have money coming in from grants or from gifts, and you're just starting to do this little trick with tuition, it can start to destabilize your finances, which is happening to quite a lot of schools right now. There's an organization called NACUBO, the National Association of College and University Business Officers, and they do a pretty good survey every year that asks private colleges in particular to report about their tuition discounting. And last year, they said they found that tuition discounting reached an all-time high of about 45%. That's pretty high. The current survey for the current year, for the past year, is underway right now, and those reports will be out pretty soon. So discounting is a kind of a thing that really can destabilize a lot of college budgets. And if you're reporting about a particular institution, it's not an easy number to get, but if you look at the financial reports, sometimes you can see what they report as their net tuition revenue. And if you do a little math on the sticker price, you can sort of get a feel for how much they're having to discount. I should also mention that rather than discount prices, some schools are taking a different approach. They've decided they're tired of playing this game of like having a high price and then offering a discount and trying to maneuver and not trick students, but try to encourage students to come. Some places have kind of outright just lowered their sticker price flat out and said, you know what, we're going to have more transparency in our pricing model. We need to make this much money from tuition. We're not going to play as many of these tuition games. And at the Chronicle, we've recently covered some of these moves at places like Converse College, Ashland, Concordia. I have a whole list here: Seton Hall, Sewanee, University of the South, Wilson College, and a bunch more. We call these sort of tuition resets, places that are almost going to maybe true value tuition pricing.
Right. Right, which does, I think, make things easier for parents. It's more transparent. You know up front when you're applying what you're going to pay, as opposed to getting accepted and then waiting to see how much scholarship you'll be offered.
And it eliminates some of the gamesmanship. And it's a marketing technique for the colleges, because they also have to kind of hope that every family understands that the $30,000 you're paying at college A is the price you're going to pay. Some other school is going to charge $40,000. Well, there's this thing out in higher ed they call the Chivas Regal effect. People think Chivas Regal,
if it costs more, it must be worth more.
Even though I know people who don't think Chivas Regal is such a great scotch, that for the price, they
no Scotch company has paid us for
this ad. Yeah. So I mean, you're fighting against the Chivas Regal effect, and you're fighting against a few other trends in higher education pricing right now when you try that strategy. But some schools have tried to do it. Now, it's important to note also, one of the reasons schools can do this discounting thing is because really it might not feel that way if you're in a certain environment with a lot of people competing for a great number of a lot of highly elite students applying for some limited number of spots at the top schools. But really, most colleges are not that selective. Most colleges are looking for students, and they're not as They're not doing the kinds of, only 1 out of, 25 students gets in or something like that. In fact, let's go to this. Oh, I keep doing this the wrong way, sorry. No. Or maybe I don't have it as a slide. Yeah, only 2% of four-year colleges accept fewer than a quarter of the students who apply, and 85% of colleges accept half or more of those who apply. So think about that for a little bit. That's really the admissions game, the admissions selectivity frenzy that you all hear about and read about in newspapers. Some of you are writing them yourselves, I guess. That does apply for a certain sector of the schools, but not all schools. And only 4% of undergrads go to colleges where fewer than 25% are admitted. 80% of all students go to colleges that accept at least half of their students who apply. So we're really thinking about higher ed as a market and pricing. This is an important thing to keep in mind.
And I hope that that's something that journalists who are writing about this issue will put front and center, because there's so much stress for parents and students around this idea of acceptance into elite universities. So if you can get across this idea that there are lots of colleges out there who are accepting a much larger percentage of students than the top 10, I think that's useful for your audience. And I think it's a story that people who are facing this issue would want to read.
Definitely true. We get a little frustrated in our office about this as well sometimes, because there really are quite a lot of excellent colleges out there that aren't playing in that game. I'm actually thinking that something might be a little bit off here. So I want to switch gears a little bit now to student aid, student debt. Now we've talked a little bit about the trends in spending, and they're up. Now we should talk about the things that might be mitigating those a little bit. Student aid for all undergraduates topped $185 billion in last year. That's double the amount from a decade ago in inflation-adjusted dollars. I thought I had a nice pie chart that showed that, but I'll go down. See, I'm going to learn by the end of this webinar how to hit the button. Here's the nice pie chart that shows that. And so you can see how it breaks down: Pell Grants, federal work-study money, and the like. And Linda asked me not to put this chart in there, but I kept it anyway. This is just the dollar version of that. It's not a very pretty chart on the slide, I know, but if you go back to look at it later, you can see where all the money comes from.
Great resource, this chart.
Right, so I was thinking resource. I wasn't thinking presentation. Obviously, there's been a big increase in student aid and in student loan and student lending. This slide shows you that between the last 10 years, basically, the average amount of grant aid per student, per full-time student, increased by 57%. Grant aid is the one on the top. The average federal loan increased by 43%. These numbers are all adjusted for inflation, so the last numbers are the current numbers, and the other ones are adjusted back. And again, when you're looking at numbers from 10 years, it's good to look at inflation numbers. And if these don't match up with some of the other numbers that you sometimes look at when you see data on college costs, this might be the reason. I'm not saying the other numbers aren't valid, but it might be good sometimes to compare inflation-adjusted numbers with real numbers as well. As I showed you in that little pie chart before, there are a lot of other grant programs besides the Pell Grant program. That's the one we hear the most about. They're the one we hear a lot about, and they tend to fight about the most in Congress. I think it's interesting that the one that affects more families, more people, is the tax benefits, tax credits that are out there. Now, those are much smaller numbers than the Pell Grant number, but as you can see, some 15 million people are taking advantage of the tax credits right now in the tax code that sort of help. And here's an uglier version of the same kind of a chart. This shows you what all the major federal grant programs are and where they basically are being used and which kinds of institutions. Again, these are the kinds of charts that you can just kind of have as background as you're doing the kind of reporting and to understand when you're writing about different kinds of loans. We'll talk a little bit later about interest rates and student loans, but here's sort of the big picture of where that federal money and state money is going. Student debt. Well, we all have been hearing a little bit about that lately. Obviously, average student debt has been creeping up, especially since 2009. No surprise, given the state of the economy. And this sort of shows the trend. This is only for four-year public colleges. I don't think I didn't find a comparable slide for the other things, but this gives you a look at the picture. And I think probably the numbers probably would be different at private colleges, but I think the trend lines are pretty much the same. And we hear a lot about the $1 trillion in student debt. Here's a version of that in blue and orange. Though this is actually, this is the map borrowed over the last 10 years. This is actually probably doesn't add up to $1 trillion. But this sort of shows you again the trend lines. And it's also important to note the borrowers, in this case you mentioned between graduate students and undergraduate students, a lot of this debt is in the graduate field, which is not to be discounted, but when you think about those numbers, it's important to remember that as well. So that's kind of a scary slide, I guess, right? Look at all those big numbers out there. But wait, she says, 40% of the students who have borrowed owe less than $10,000, and only 30% owe more than $25,000, and 98% borrow, sorry, I typed it wrong, $5,000 or less. Did I do that math right? Yeah. Oh.
Is that right? Did you say?
I said 98, but I really meant, sorry, 97% borrow $50,000 or less.
97% of students borrow $50,000 or less.
Right. In other words, look at this chart up here. 2% are, may have got, I think that's right. Yes, yeah.
Right, well, it looks like 2% are at more than 100,000 and 1% are even higher than that. So 97% are below 100,000.
Mm-hmm. And then add in the 9.
Mm-hmm.
So my math. See, journalists doing math, always a problem. Mm-hmm. So then add in the 9. So 12%. Mm-hmm. And after that, it's under 50.
Right.
Sorry, fix that number, 12%.
So that's not as bad as one might think. And I love this 40% of people who have loans of less than $10,000.
Right. I mean, that's a lot of people out there.
It's a lot of people, but that's a realistic number to pay off at least.
Yeah, and if you're not making good salary, that's a hard number to pay off. But it is not a terrifying number. It's probably less than you're going to borrow to buy a car. Right. Mm-hmm. That said, so it is an issue. It sort of again gets back to that first chart that I showed about family wealth and family incomes. If you're not making money and if your income is not going up, these loans are harder to pay off. And I got this chart just the other day in an email from a University of Kansas Institute. There is a concern. Loan defaults are a problem because they have the current problem that you have to pay them off, and they contribute to something that people are starting to call now the wealth gap, which is what this debt does to your ability to later on buy a home or to go on to graduate school. So I thought this was kind of a nice chart to take a look at here. We don't have to study it right now, but it's a sort of a good, in one graphic look at where this is going. And there's a website here at the bottom about the very detailed report that this group put out, which I think is also a very nice resource for people to see.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the two red squares that have the dollar signs in them, and you see average outstanding debt 1989 compared with now, or 2010. That's a significant increase in debt. And across the bottom, the lower amount of money you have available to do other things in your life.
Right.
So there is an opportunity cost even to
there's an opportunity cost to buy a car. The car thing is everyone talks about right now. There's an opportunity cost for getting your home. There's an opportunity cost for paying off, starting to save for retirement when you're starting your first job and you're in your mid to late 20s and you start to get that thing from your work and they want you to start filling in for your 401k. It's going to make it harder for you to do all those things.
Right, and this is, of course, an important story right now because with the recession, students who've come out of college in the last 4 or 5 years are going into jobs that pay less than they might have expected to earn. So they're sort of in a double bind situation between their college loans and their lower salaries, and I think it's a real good story to be looking at.
Yeah, and they're in even more of a vice, as we're going to see in a minute, because part of what they're paying for are the extra costs that are being put upon them if they went to a public college in particular, because the way the state has withdrawn state funding for higher education, so they're paying a bigger piece of the tuition bill now than they used to also. So it kind of comes at them in a lot of directions. So we hear a lot about default rates. I write a lot about default rates in the Chronicle. As you can see from this chart, the default rate numbers just came out. These are sort of the official federal government default rates. The government measures them under a window of 2 years. Basically, 6 months after you graduate, you're supposed to start repaying your loans, or 6 months after you leave school, even if you didn't graduate. And then you're measured in that you're measured for 2 years after that. If you manage to keep paying off your loans, everyone who defaults within the first 2 years is counted in this default rate calculation that the government does. And it's important to colleges because if their rate is too high, they could, in theory, be kicked out of the student loan program. In reality, very few schools have ever been kicked out of the student loan program because there's a lot of ways for schools to kind of work this default rate. But as you can see here, the default rate has,
We'll just continue working.
We have patches coming in. The default rate was up to 10% this year, which looks bad. It was really bad, though, 20 years ago. That's before the Department of a lot of trade schools were kicked out of the loan program for very high default rates. This debate we have now about for-profit colleges is a very vociferous one, and there was a similar one back in the late 80s under Senator Sam Nunn. And so you see these numbers here. And this, as I said, this is a 2-year measure. This is sort of the general chart. This is the overall default rate. Default rates vary by sector. For-profit colleges, their default rate was about 13.6. It was 9.6 at private nonprofit colleges. Oh, sorry, it was at public colleges it was 9.6, and at private nonprofit colleges it was 5.2. Another way of looking at that, and the way you hear a lot of people talking about it, and the debates about for-profit colleges is for-profit colleges account for 32% of all the students entering repayment, 32% of all those people who are expected to pay, at 43% of all the defaults. Here's a, come on, slide to show us. We have a frozen computer.
Yeah, that next slide doesn't want to come up. Let's see if we can. Yeah, I think we're going to give our computer a minute to.
Everybody do a little karma moment here for the slides.
Think Zen.
Is this a moment to take a question or two? Seriously?
Well, I wonder, based on what you just said, the numbers about for-profit colleges, the default rates there, are they in fact in any danger of being kicked out of these programs, or is that not?
There are every year there are a few schools that show up. I think it was like fewer than a dozen this year. That default, when the rate's going to go from a 2-year rate to a 3-year window next year. But they're also going to raise the threshold, so your rate could be, in other words, you could have a higher default rate after 3 years and you still won't get kicked out of the program. There's a lot of discussion right now about the default rates at for-profit colleges. There's a lot of people, when we've reported this a little bit at the Chronicle, there's a lot of effort at the colleges to kind of minimize their defaults, in some cases by using tactics that are not, that sort of encourage students to get deferments and forbearances, and to, they basically have a very, very aggressive programs to get those students to get deferments and forbearances so they don't get counted in the numbers. And there are a lot of advocacy groups who talk about this as gaming the system. And so in theory, this default rate cliff could be a big deal for the colleges. In reality, it doesn't. Colleges spend a lot of time and money trying to make sure that their default rate doesn't hit that magic number.
Yeah, you can understand that. Raina, it looks like our computer is not coming back online. So maybe there's a technical fix you have in mind.
Or not.
Would you like me to stop sharing?
Yeah, and then I'll just.
Sorry, folks.
Well, stay with us. We'll get this sorted out. Now, shall we share again?
Bingo. That's it. That's exactly what we want.
Is that where you'd
Yeah.
like to be?
This just shows. Thank you very much. Magic of technology. It works. This just sort of shows the distribution of where the defaults are by the sectors of schools: public 2-year, public 4-year, for-profit. Obviously, it's pretty straightforward slide. Before we leave this whole default discussion, though, I wanted to add one more thing. Sue Donarski, who is a professor at the University of Michigan, who has written a very interesting proposal about a new approach to sort of thinking about student loan and repayment plans. She's got a proposal to change the repayment plan to kind of one of these where everyone would pay a percentage of their income for 25 years. And in her modeling, it sort of all works out better. Anyway, and there's a paper she's written about that was presented by the Brookings Institution, along with a few other papers there. You could look that up at the Brookings website. Sue Dynarski, Dynarski. In that paper, though, she points out that one of the other big problems with defaults is younger borrowers tend to default a lot more than older borrowers. It makes perfectly good sense, right? When you're younger, you don't have such a big salary. You're just starting out in your career, and it's not as easy for you to repay your loans. It's one of the reasons she thinks about this income repayment approach and many other people are thinking about it also, as a more logical way of thinking about student loans rather than put the burden there.
Right, it helps you build your payments as you build your income.
So she says we don't have a default problem, we have a repayment problem.
Interesting way to look at it.
It's a different kind of set of semantics, but in the end of the day, it actually does. So that's an issue a lot of people will be hearing a lot more about, income-based repayment. There's obviously, if we're going to talk about it in a little bit, there's a few programs that the government now has as the Congress gears up to renew the Higher Education Act over the next year. I think we'll be hearing a lot more about income-based repayments and various approaches to that. So that will be a topic, would be worth people's while to start taking a look at some of the papers people are producing about that. Want to talk a little bit about student aid and affordability. As I mentioned before early on, the costs and the sticker price is just one piece of the puzzle. All the resources that are coming to you that help you pay for it are the other piece of the puzzle. So more students are receiving Pell Grants than before. There was a little dip this year because of they eliminated year-round Pell. Students used to be able to get Pell Grants out of basically in the summer, winter, and spring, and they, as part of the cutbacks, they eliminated the summer Pell, so year-round Pell. So that's why there's that slight dip in that. But obviously, the 10-year trend over time is up. But I know this is a geeky chart too. You won't necessarily understand it now as we're staring at it, but the problem is the Pell Grants are not keeping up with the rising sticker prices. They never really did at private colleges, and they're not at publics as either. It's just Pell Grants.
So you're saying the gap between the gold line and the blue line is getting larger.
The gap is getting larger, even as the blue line goes up, and the maximum Pell Grant now I think is $5,500. But when you compare that to the rising cost of college, the gap is getting larger. Federal government is not the only place where student aid comes from. It's the bigger player, but states also provide student aid. And many people, maybe on this webinar, are covering their state legislatures as well, and so that's a big issue in states. And
I'm guessing that's a place where state legislatures are likely to cut back as they have to cover a larger share of overall costs.
Right,
and federal aid diminishes.
And one of the ways they tend to do that a lot is actually by restricting what kinds of colleges that can get aid or the kinds of students that can get aid.
Oh, interesting.
This is a chart that sort of talks about so there's about $11 billion in student aid, which is now given out by states. And this year about $6.4 billion of that is based on need-based, whether your family qualifies. And the rest is so-called merit aid. If you look at this chart, back in the 70s, it was all need-based aid. And as recently as till 1994-95, the merit aid piece, the orange piece, was a pretty small piece of the pie. It was only about 10% or so, if I did that math right. Since then, it's been growing quite a lot. And now about a quarter of all the state aid is merit-based aid. So what's merit? Well, merit are a lot of things, right? It's athletic scholarships, maybe it's academic scholarships, maybe it's you're a great flute player. I mean, it could be a lot of things. Some of it is might be some of that same some of it's almost the that discount rate thing we talked about before. It's you're a good student and we want to get you, and we think if we offer you $2 million of a $2,000 of a presidential scholarship because you had good grades in high school and good SATs, you'll come. So merit aid is a sort of a growing piece of this pie, which, in a lot of, and it's frankly very politically popular in states. When you talk about what legislatures want to do, most states, public officials want to help needy students, but most people also realize that they want to serve middle-class students. That's that's a good voting block, and that's a good, frankly, that's the people who are paying taxes and are contributing in the state, and people don't want to feel like the only thing that they're doing for college students is for the neediest students. So the desire to help middle-class families is exactly what you see in this chart with the bigger bars of orange.
Interesting.
And just to keep track of the average state grant for full-time equivalent student, which is, there's no human being really like that, a full-time equivalent student probably, that's $670. And you could look at this chart and see how your state stacks up relative to the others. This chart happens to come from the College Board, but there's a survey that's done every year by the National Association, I gotta get this name right, the National Association of State Student Grant and Aid Programs. And they put out a report every year, and it has a ton of really great data on student aid.
All right, that's a good resource.
Yep. This slide right here is a little confusing, but to me this slide basically tells the story of what's been happening in the states with state funding for public higher education. Enrollment, that's the little purpley line there, enrollment is rising. State spending per student, which is really how you have to look at this, is falling. Net.
And which color is that? State spending.
State spending is the dark blue.
The dark blue is state spending per student.
And the light blue is the net tuition. It's getting bigger. So leaving aside the sticker, blah blah blah. At the end of the day, however way they calculated that stuff on the left, on the back at their institution, however way they factored in their student grants or the sticker price and all the rest, this is the difference at the states. This chart tells you the story. Enrollments have been going up, except for this little tiny dip last year. The state share of that cost is dropping, and the tuition share of that cost is going up. That's what we were talking before about the squeeze. Right. That's the other side of that squeeze. People are picking this up. There's another source of good information on college costs. There's something called the Delta Cost Project. It's now part of the American Institutes for Research, and the Delta Project on College Costs, I think it's called. You can Google it. So they did a sort of a similar version of this chart. They did it broken down for the public universities by sector: research, masters, bachelors, and community colleges. And well, you can tell the line that's going up is going to always be tuition these days, and the line that's going down is the one that's going to be state revenues, state support. So. That's at the states. This is a big part of the story. And again, this is per full-time equivalent student, so it's kind of normed for the enrollment growth. The Delta Project, they do a really good analysis on spending. What they do is they actually track, I think it's something like 800 institutions, and they've been tracking. They've kind of gone through this data and of spending data and cleaned it up and organized it and analyzed it, and they've been tracking these 800-something institutions over 10 years, and they're continuing to do that now. So that really gives them a good feel for trends. They will tell you that if you look at these charts, it's pretty clear, public and private. The size of these bars, it's divided up into these geeky categories that people use: education and research, sponsored research, auxiliary. These are basically the three main categories of spending at colleges. If you see over 10 years, the sizes of these bars haven't really changed that much in any of the categories. The spending, it's not like suddenly someone's spending a ton more on sponsored research or auxiliary enterprises. Spending, it goes up in most cases, but it doesn't really sort of change that dramatically. What has changed is this chart, which I resisted putting in when I talked to the folks at Delta, but if you stare at it a little bit, it does tell you. They call it, this is their favorite chart because it it shows the substitution. It shows on the left, it shows you the tuition's going up. I mean, the change in colleges are relying more on tuition from all different colleges are relying. This is how colleges rely on tuition. The middle one sort of shows you where the state money is going. It's going down. And obviously, there's no state money for the private colleges, so that's why there's nothing on those bars. Right. And then it sort of shows you the difference in spending. Basically, spending per student is actually going down. So the colleges are getting squeezed a little bit. They're not spending more per student; they're spending less, even though they're charging you more.
Right. That's discouraging.
Yeah, it's so they call it the Delta Cost Project folks call this a substitution problem. These data are only since the 2010 fiscal year. There'll be some more data coming out from them over the next several months.
Is there any data that looks at individual colleges and tells you what the trend is at an individual college?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, if there is, it's maybe
top secret.
Well, I mean, maybe at the state level, there very well may be for at states, and probably in most states there are state higher education coordinating boards or a board of governors. There are generally these broader governing boards for their institutions, and they may track that kind of stuff a little more directly, but on a national basis, not so much.
Right. Might be a good story, though, for a state-level reporter to compare the public colleges in their state and see which ones, how that ratio is changing.
Right. And frankly, to then go back, maybe wait for the next set of Delta numbers to come out, compare them against these national averages. This is the beauty of this. As I said, this is like the school that doesn't exist, right? But when you have this kind of a national database to look at, then you could look at your own school and say, it's we're out of whack with the Delta project, and then why? There may be some very good reasons, or it may not be.
Right. Exactly. Good.
So that's sort of the broad. That's there's a hold off to that. That's the sort of the overview of the fundamental literature, let's call it the great books of college costs literature out there. What's out there?
Right. Well, it's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, and I realize that. And
but there are some great resources.
I mean, and that's the thing. And what I tried to do for this was include information from, as I said, the College Board, the Delta Cost Project. You could that chart with the state bars on it. Sorry, the chart with the bars that I like so much. This is from an organization called State Higher Education Executives Officers. They have a lot of really great data on college costs. National Association of, I work in a world of acronyms all day long. The National Association of State Budget Officers also has done some good reports on higher education lately. So that's kind of where that is. So that's the data dump. You also said you want to talk a little bit about some new models for paying for college and paying off loans. So there are obviously a bunch of income-based repayment plans that the government has right now. And they're pretty intricate, and I didn't think it would be worth sort of going into all of them here, but reporters should familiarize themselves with some of those. Some of these are programs that allow you to pay off your loans for 10. Maybe you pay a share of your income for 10 years, and then particularly if you're working in public service, you can get the rest of it written off after 10 years. And the Obama administration has recently sort of included more loans that could count in that, and more programs. In other words, there are more generous opportunities for income-based repayment. And as we were talking before about that whole 25-year thing, I think the longest payment now is 20 though. The push in the government right now is to encourage more students to look into income-based repayment plans, and I think that's that's probably where the government will be going further on student loans as we go forward.
And where can reporters get information about those plans?
I don't know the exact website, but if you start the Department of Education websites have a lot of that kind of information.
Okay.
You'd actually asked me before about. Before we got on camera here, about where people could get information about colleges that cost a lot or cost a little. There's a list out there, or we call it I think it's sort of dubbed in the policy wonk world as the shame list. But the Obama administration has put out this list, publishes a list every year of the most expensive colleges by categories.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is going to be sticker price. But it's at if you can't find it by Googling shame and college list or something like that, start by going to collegecost.ed.gov, and that has that list of the colleges.
Okay, collegecost.ed.gov. Good to know.
So we've got these repayment plans. Now, in addition to sort of the government income-based repayment plans that are out there, which, there's something called pay-as-you-earn, and there's a bunch of them. There's another, and that you can find pretty easily out on the Google. There are a lot of sort of private companies or private programs that are starting to come up right now. There's a few companies, I listed a few of them here. There are Lumini, Upstart, Pave, or at least 3 companies that are out there right now and that are trying to sort of crowdfund your college loans. Instead of going out and borrowing money from somebody from like a federal loan program, like a company like Pave will find investors who want to fund you. Linda, you want to go to college? You seem like a pretty good prospect. I think you look like you're likely to make a lot of money in your future here in journalism.
Looks can be deceiving.
in journalism. So I'm gonna, you and I will make a private contract. I'll give you $20,000 towards your college costs. You agree to pay me back, let's say 2 or 3% of your income over X years, over the next several years, and hopefully that'll be a good investment for me, and that'll be a good deal for you. So some of these Lumini, Upstart, and Pave are all companies right now that are sort of pushing this model out there.
Very interesting. So they actually link individual students with specific investors?
Correct.
Wow.
And in some cases, the investors are sort of philanthropic people. Some cases, I think some of these companies maybe are more interested in, you're going to journalism, so I don't know. But if you're going into investment banking, they might be more likely to fund you, given your interests. And, it's basically there are these platform sites to create these private contracts.
Right.
It's not a huge piece of the market right now, obviously, but it's kind of an emerging trend out there. There's also some people who are pushing this idea at states. Some of the people on the webinar may have already been reading a little bit about this program that's being proposed for Oregon called Pay It Forward, where you would works on a similar model, but the state would be the facilitator for it. And I don't know that much about it, frankly, but I just heard about this other entity called 13th Avenue, which is a nonprofit that's trying to do some of the same things that Lumini and Upstart are doing.
So the advantage to the student presumably is that the interest rate or the overall payoff would be less than if you went through a standard loan.
That's some of the big concerns about this, because it may not be less. I mean, it might be that it's an automatic income-based repayment might be good. I can't imagine that too many of these things are going to be better than the federal student loan rate. The federal student loan rate, as we all know, that rate's gone down. Congress just lowered that. Right now, if you're an undergraduate student, you're going to be paying, I'll cheat, about 3.9% right now on your undergraduate student loans. Other loans cost more, but there's limits on those student loans. The federal government has maximum limits on the student loans, and so there might be a gap that you might want to fill. Again, I think these are more for a little bit sort of niche funding ideas, particularly the commercial ones. The Pay It Forward one, if it develops, it would be more of a broader state policy, so it would probably have a few more safeguards in there. But
Interesting.
We also talked a little bit as we're preparing for this webinar about, what else could you do out there to save yourself some money when you're trying to go to college? If you don't want to pay $50,000 and go to a private college in a big city, that's going to cost you a lot of money. And there are, increasingly some options out there that are developing. I'm listed a few of them here. Most of these are kind of along the base, the new approach in higher ed, the new old approach, frankly, because it's been around for a long time. There's a big competency-based movement in higher education right now. What's sort of freeing this up is the education department has recently made it a little bit clearer that you can use federal student aid money for competency-based programs. Before, the student aid money was linked pretty much directly to the credit hour and the time you sat in the classroom. Now the government has said you could actually use some student aid money for some of these other programs as well.
What is a competency-based program?
So it comes, it's sort of what it sounds like. You instead of sitting through a class for a semester,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to hear the lecture and read the lecture, and then do all the tests,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you read the book on your own and take the test and complete the work. And hopefully it's not as simple as just reading the book and taking the test. There are some, there are a lot of faculty involved with developing these programs right now, and so they're trying to develop them so that it's a little more sophisticated than that. But
So you pay tuition.
You do pay
for
tuition.
that, but is it less than if you actually sat in class, or is it just a time saver?
it's a time, and presumably at the end of the day, it wouldn't be, you should be able to, you should conclude, to get the credit, you should be able to show the same mastery as the student that was in the class.
Right.
In some cases, it's getting credit for things you already know, prior learning.
Right.
In other cases, it's sort of a module that's set up so that you can almost do it at your own pace.
Mm-hmm.
So self-paced is another version of this.
Mm-hmm.
Competency-based is maybe like where you bring your own knowledge into it, or colleges like Wisconsin is right now developing this thing where they're actually kind of developing the programs which are just more designed where you could sort of pursue them more on your own, maybe with a mentor or something else, where you wouldn't necessarily, where the difference is you wouldn't have it's not sort of tied to the seat time. It's not tied to the semester. I mean, it might actually take you longer, but.
So is it less expensive?
And it doesn't, it doesn't have to be, but it happens to be that the reason that it's attractive right now is the people who are offering it are making it less expensive. Obviously you wouldn't have the same cost of the faculty member and all the rest.
Sure.
So, the University of Wisconsin has created something right now, it's called the Flex Option.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's about $2,000 for 3 months. And so at that point, but you can get a lot of credits and a lot of coursework under your belt in that period of time.
Interesting.
College of Southern New Hampshire, it's called SNU. That's their nickname up there. They have something, I didn't know that until I was on a radio show once with the president, and they kept talking about SNU. They have something called College for America. There's a company based in Baltimore called Straighter Line. They have a program where they offer you, you get you can take as many courses as you want for $99 a month. Basically, their courses are online, you sign up. They have some mentors that kind of help you work your way through it. They have about 50 or so colleges that will give you credit for taking these courses. There's another company called Sophia, which does a similar kind of thing to Straighter Line. I actually don't know as much about them. Northern Arizona is also recently been approved to offer a competency-based program like Wisconsin does. So here's some public colleges that are,
So
to get into this.
If you did something like Straighter Line, would your degree be coming from, did you say it was Baltimore?
Well, no, the company's just based in Baltimore. Straighter Line has arrangements with a lot of colleges. And so
if you take classes at different colleges, what is your diploma?
Well, at the end of the day, you have to be matriculated at some university. But in the same way that a lot of students right now will take their, in the summer they'll take calculus in the summer, and then they'll transfer that back to their school.
Right.
Straighter Line will let you, and just their model in particular, you can take, calculus and a few other classes under this model, kind of for a low cost. This whole notion of there's a lot of the movement out there. People maybe have been hearing the term disruption. A lot of the disruption out there is at the level of the general education courses that are often seen at many schools as kind of interchangeable, and a lot of these models are sort of developing to give people lower cost alternatives to get some of these general education courses.
Right.
And that's all I've got right off the bat here for my formal presentation. I wanted to particularly thank the folks at the Delta Project, Sandy Baum and some others at the College Board who put up with a lot of my emailing back and forth, the Parthenon Group for the cool slide at the start, and to also all my colleagues at the Chronicle of Higher Education who walk me through this every day.
Well, and we also are appreciative to those folks for adding to your expertise. A quick question before we go comes from a viewer who asks, what are the different conditions when on student loans? You can have a student loan that's taken out by the student. Sometimes the student's parents may take the loan. Are there different interest rates based on, how does that work?
So there are at least 4 or 5 different kinds of federal loans. There's the subsidized student loan. That's if you qualify by income, you get a subsidized loan. There's an unsubsidized federal loan as well that the student nominally takes out. There are also something called Parent Plus loans.
Mhm.
Those are the ones that that families tend to take out
Right.
on behalf of their children.
Uh-huh.
That's all within and those are all the loans that are kind of right now in the under they were all the ones that were affected by that new law that changed the interest rates
Mhm.
and lowered the interest rates, and now those rates will rise and fall pegged to the T-bill.
Right.
There are also private loans, which is an interesting topic. These are called private student loans, and they're offered through banks and other entities. There's a movement out there. I've heard some people argue that they shouldn't even be called a student loan because they don't offer a lot of the protections that the federal loans offer in terms of repayment options. They're not. You can't do income-based repayment with them. You can't easily get a deferment or a forbearance on them as you do with a federal loan. And so I've been hearing this argument from people saying the private loans should just be called like a loan. I shouldn't be able to call them student loans because the student loan has this sort of has expectations around it with that term that are not prevalent in the private loans.
Right. Very interesting. I see that we are out of time, so I want to thank all of you for watching today. A special thanks to Goldie Blumenstyk.
Thank you.
And a request to our viewers. You should see on your screen now some poll questions, and we hope that you'll take a few minutes to answer those questions, give us some feedback on this. In addition, there should be a box on your screen that gives you that option to donate. So if this has been useful for you, we appreciate if you take advantage of that. A final reminder that you can check out our website at nationalpress.org to see the other programs we have coming up. And I'll just summarize. November 21st, we have part 1 of a 3-part webinar series on cybersecurity. Parts 2 and 3 of that series take place on December 5th and December 10th. And then on December 17th, there's an in-house program here in DC on housing finance. And that is part of our 3-part program on the mechanics of finance, which we're doing with a partner, the Milken Institute Center for Financial Markets. That's about it for 2013. So thank you again for watching.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you.